I am here with my first guest here on Dragons and Demons. So, my first guest, I feel like I wanted to go with something that was close to home for me, something that was recent, and an experience that we'll get into here in a minute, but something that I felt was very timely as I reached out to this individual as soon as it happened to me, and I was like, you know what, this is a good go. So, joining me today is a former assistant coach of mine back when I was head coach. We'll talk about how we met here in a minute. He has more wins in his career than I do of football games, period. Um, he's got more coaching experience than I do years of life. So, welcome to the show, Coach Bob Plante.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming
Appreciate
on.
it.
So, first of all, give us a little bit about your background.
So, 63 years old, coached high school football about 40 years, but that wasn't my primary source of income. I was a insurance agent, had ownership in an insurance agency. Recently sold that business and retired. But you know, grew up in Maryland, went to school at University of Richmond. Um, Mom and dad were home for me. Very typical 1960s type of kid. Um, I've always enjoyed coaching and mentoring. So, I remember when I was in college that my grandfather had said to me, what are you going to major in? I said, well, I want to coach football. And he said,
It's
he
not quite
says,
the major.
yeah, you don't major in that. You need to get a business degree. So I decided that I was going to do that and then coach on the side, which is what I ended up doing. So, and I did it for 40 years.
So I don't know if what your recollection of how we met was, but I had a kind of a run in with one of. So at the time when I was at my lowest in my coaching career, and I was searching everywhere for help, and I couldn't find people. I didn't have the resources. I didn't have the network to try and find people. I met someone who was kind of through another friend, and it was a guy that is a really close friend of yours, and I'm not going to drop his name because I'm not going to.
Got it.
I don't know if he's ever going to listen or not, but
Got it.
somebody that was like, "Oh, I'm good friends with Bob Plante. Why don't you guys get together?" So he sold the meeting to me as if you were going to come over and be offensive coordinator. And at first, I looked at him. I was like, "You're crazy. I'm never giving up the ball. I'm calling the ball."
Mm-hmm.
My arrogant young self was like, "That'll never happen." But I'll see if I can go convince Coach to come coach under me, and he can just do something simpler than that. So we met, and you were kind of like under the impression that I was bringing you in to take over for me and
Right.
be the head coach and take the job, and we were both like totally
Like,
on different planets.
exactly.
So, but
Exactly.
since that day, we kind of developed a pretty good relationship.
Yep.
We did 7-on-7s and things like that together.
Mm-hmm.
You came out and did speeches for lacrosse team when I coached that. You came out and spoke to teams and spoke to me when I needed it. We met like pretty much every off season when
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
again, kind of running myself ragged and dry because I didn't know what else to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I always appreciated that. Is that kind of how you remember that?
Yeah. I remember being told that he's a young coach and he just needs somebody in there to help mentor him, and and you could start to be the head coach and then pass it back to him. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll talk to him.
Yeah.
Young guy, because I had that's so important because I had guys mentor me as a
Right.
young coach. And, that's what we do. We want to help the next guy. And so, yeah, and I was like, I think what was the meeting, like 5 minutes long, when I said, okay,
It was 5 or 10 minutes,
a
but
little
in
longer.
the first 30 seconds, I think we kind of figured out that we were on different pages.
We're not on the same
I sit
page.
down with my interview questions like I would have been the coach, and he was sitting there looking at me like, "What are you doing?" I was like,
Yeah. Yeah, that was an odd day, but it all worked out.
Right, but you ended up getting a head coaching job there a couple weeks after.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like I said, we kind of worked together on some things. We never played each other. We did scrimmage once.
Right.
And I showed up with my 14-man roster. And
Right.
You had your 4A roster.
Right.
So we had two of our players. One was injured. One went to a quinceañera, and we didn't see him that day. So we had 14 players. We had our 11 on the field. And at one point, one of our subs was hurt. The other was our quarterback, who we designated one way.
Right.
And the third and final kid was our kicker.
Right.
So
right.
I'm looking at the sideline. I look across the field. And we make eye contact. And I'm like, "Coach, we're done." He's like, "No, you are done. Get out of here." So again, it was a scrimmage we needed, but it was a
Right.
understanding that you saw kind of what we were going through. So
Right, but the amazing part is just a couple of years later, you have 100 and someone, 101 kids out there. So it's not where you start, it's where you finish, right?
right. So let's get into the fun part. So
Okay.
when you would come in, and I think I've heard this story like 3 or 4 times. So you would come in and tell this magnificent story about a bike, and that's kind of what we're calling this episode is get back on that bike. So you told it a couple times, and again, I kind of had a personal experience with my family here that made me like, man, we got to bring him in for the first shot at that story. So,
Mm.
well, go ahead, take it away.
So the reason why I tell this story is I wanted the kids to understand how I coach, which sometimes may appear harsh and maybe seem high pressure. It may seem that I create adversity because I do. And I get after them and I push them and I challenge them. And so I tell the story because I coach the way I was fathered. I coach the way I was mentored. So this particular story is, teaching my eldest son how to ride a bike, and I taught him in the same way that my father taught me. And what's interesting about that is, it was important to my grandfather when he was teaching my father how to ride a bike that, you start teaching life lessons as soon as you can because you just don't know if you're going to be there the next
Right.
day. So, unfortunately, my father lost his dad in World War II at the age of 9 years old. So that was always important to me. And when my dad told me the story, or how he learned how to ride a bike, I remember thinking, "That's what I'm going to do." So, and again, the way I learned it was a little worse than the way Bo learned it, my son. But essentially, it was I can remember it was after work. I was driving down the driveway, and we had a long driveway, and I was got my driving right down the driveway, and I see my eldest son, and at the time he was maybe 5, uh, blonde hair, curly blonde hair, blue eyes, sweetest kid you ever saw, and he had his bike, with the training wheels on it, and had a wrench in his hand. And he's smiling and all excited because this was the day he's going to learn how to ride a bike, 2-wheeler. So for me, seeing that, it wasn't the same excitement because I knew what was about to happen. So got Bo, we took the training wheels off, we walked in the front of my house, had a small sloping hill. It was really long soft grass and soft bushes at the end of it. And so the idea is to get Bo on the bike and kind of gently push him down the hill and let him do what he needs to do to try to stay on the bike. So got him to the top of the hill, and he grabs the handlebars. He's got his helmet on. He turns back to me, he says, "Daddy, don't let go." Actually makes me choke up a little bit because as a dad, because I knew I was going to let go.
Yeah.
So I gently pushed him down the hill, and of course, maybe got a couple feet, came over the handlebars, landed on his chin, grass stains on his shirt and bruises and tears start, and "Daddy, you let go of the bike." And I didn't say a word, and I gathered him up and I kind of walked him back to the top of the hill. And this time he didn't turn back around. He grabbed on as tight as he could because he knew I was going to gently push him down the hill. And again, tumbled off the bike, didn't make it that far. Well, this went on a number of times till finally he makes it all the way down to the end of the hill. And he jumps off his bike and he throws his hands in the air, and he runs into the house crying. So now this is the time. Now he's a young kid. So, I mean, how much is he going to learn from this experience? And to a lot of people, how harsh does that sound that you would do that to your own child? But it was important. And the life lesson here is when I told Bo, we're sitting in his bedroom, and he said, "Daddy, why'd you let go of the bike?" And I said, "Son, because there's going to be a time when Dad's not here, when the fight comes, when adversity comes, and you need to be able to fight for yourself because nobody's coming to save you. You need to save yourself." And at 5 years old, I don't know what he got out of that, right? But I know what I got out of it in later years. So we kind of go 20 years later. And this time, Bo is an officer in the United States Marine Corps. and he's embedded with the SDF and the Kurds. He's got a 4-man Navy SEAL security team. He's in what quote an advisory role, and they're in a forward operating base up in Syria. He gets surrounded by the enemy. And I don't think I'm allowed to tell you who the enemy was, but surrounded by the enemy. He was getting mortared all night. He was trapped. They couldn't get him out. He was laying under a truck getting mortared. For 2 days, they just get hammered. And he could see that his men were weary, that, the next attack, maybe they're not going to make it. And for some reason, laying under that truck, I get choked up thinking about it. Laying under that truck, he remembers the day he learned to ride the bike, in the words of his dad. The words essentially of my father. So he then rallies his troops. He repositions them. He calls in some artillery from a base about 30 clicks away, and he hits them square, the enemy square, and they back off, and gives them an opportunity to retreat and get back across the Iraqi border and then get home. And I guess an Osprey took them back. And no one died, and there were some wounded, but they all survived. And, so as I would tell that story, it was important that people knew, why you would gently push your kid down the hill, right? And it's because, your father, your coach, your teacher, your mentor, the fight's coming, right? Adversity's coming. And you need to have experience in how to get through it. And you need to understand sometimes nobody's coming to save you, and you got to save yourself. And you don't want these kids to just get through it, just barely make it or fail. You want them to thrive in adversity. You want them to thrive in the fight. You want them to succeed. You want them to win. That's because you love them. And so you look at the father pushing his kid down the hill, you think, does he love his kid? And I can't imagine that he could love his kid anymore.
And that experience kind of a couple weekends ago, it was nice and warm out for once in January. I take Logan to the top of the hill, takes his stuff off, his training wheels. I line him up on the hill, and I was like, oh, there's that story coming. So I got the wife on the porch. I got him in front of me, and he's like, let's go. And I run down the first time. I'm holding on to his seat. I run down with him, and then we turn around and come back up. And he's like, why didn't you let go? I got you. So I go back, and he just falls and falls and falls and falls. Same deal. And he starts getting up crying, and she's yelling, it's okay. I'm like, stop.
Yeah.
This is not a nurturing mom time. I got this. I was like, you can love him in a minute. I need to get him down this hill on his own once or twice.
Right.
So he's doing his thing. He's crying. He's getting it. And eventually I gave him a push and gave him a push and gave him a push, and still stood there. He would catch his pedal at the bottom. He'd turn around, come back up. So it was like,
yep.
And as she's yelling at him to do better, and he's crying, I'm yelling at them. Like, I'm not always going to be here, bud. You better start figuring this out on your own. This is your first life lesson. He's looking at me with all these tears in his eyes. I'm like,
right. It's hard to do.
Yeah. Someday this might actually have a big impact on
you. Yeah. But it's, it's a hard thing to do. Right. It just is to stand there, and especially for a mom. And, my wife and I used to always, I'd say, let me be the dad and you be the mom. But it's hard. It's hard for us to put our kids through that, right? Our sons through that, let alone what's going to be to a mom. But my wife was really good. Something like that would happen, like the bike, learn how to ride a bike. And I would say now, go love him up.
And we kind of see that in wrestling when he gets his butt kicked on the meat. I'm like, I'm going to handle this one. I go down, I see it's not a serious injury, but he's upset that he lost. I'm like, I got this one.
Yeah,
and seems like he's really hurting. I'm like, why don't you go down for this one?
Yeah. That's why it's great to have a mom and a dad. Right. Everybody fills a role.
So you said at one point, I coached the way I was fathered.
Mm-hmm.
And that stands out for me big time because I think I father the way I coached. I feel like it goes both ways. I feel like I was fathered by coaches. I was coached by fathers. Right. All these things come in full circle. And if you don't love the kids in front of you at least a little bit, I mean, it's not even worth doing.
No.
So I'm in education as a career. I see parenting. I see great examples. I see terrible examples. I kind of am learning from both. And I look at my boys like, you are so lucky because you're getting all these lessons at full speed.
Mm-hmm.
So that really stuck out to me.
You got it. You're on it.
So kind of some follow-up questions, and we'll get to more of an interview type of role here. So what kind of successes have you seen in student athletes? So like maybe some kids that started from nothing, or some kids, couple examples of kids that really gutted it out and really shined through when times got hard.
Mm-hmm. I remember we had this goes back. Gosh, this would have been early '90s. I was at Churchill High School, and we had this kid. His first name was Rufus. I think last name was Jackson. I know his first name's Rufus, and uh, so Rufus actually lived in Southeast DC. His father and mother divorced, so he was living with his dad over the summer.